All right, so thank you for coming to my talk about OpenID Connect. My name will become apparent through the talk because this is all about how we identify people. So during the talk, I will not show you any slides. I hope that nobody is missing seeing more slides today, so I hope you will be okay with that. Instead, I will be clicking around in this application. What you will be learning is what happens under the cover when you make an application that allows you to, for example, authenticate with Google. So in this case, I have an application that lets me know who my user is with Google or with, I'm not going to use this one, I'm going to use this also, well. Or in this case, I have a user that's authenticated with Microsoft. That happened very fast. Or you can have even a user that is authenticated with Slack. And in this case, I have the demo is not quite as streamlined as I was intending to. But here you have a user that, after a little bit of extra clicking, is authenticated with our mobile era community Slack. So if you don't have a app today that integrates with an identity provider, I hope you will find this useful. If you have an app, I hope you will find some ways to know how to improve or how to choose better which identity provider to use in which circumstances. And I hope that you'll also get a pretty good handle of what happens under the covers. So in order to illustrate how OpenID Connect works, you would normally see a diagram, but I told you I don't have any slides, so I have to improvise instead. So I would like to invite my beautiful partner Daria on stage. She will be playing the part of the user. This is your script, Daria. And I will need 2 more volunteers. So is there anyone who would play? So Christopher, would you like to play the application? So you will get now so we will do this in order of the Lithuanian flag. So the yellow is the color on the top. What's the color in the middle? Green, all right, so you'll get the green. So ask one of the volunteers for help if you need your help getting the hat fastened. And I will need, right, so this is your script. And I'll need 1 more volunteer. Stephen, would you like? Oh, wait, I mistook you for someone else. Would you like to be the identity provider? All right, so this is all about identity. So it's all about identifying. So this is Daria, and this is Christopher, and your name is Vic. So we've got Daria, who's the user, Christopher, who is the application, and Vic, you will also need a hat. I hope you like red. Sure. And you will be playing the identity provider. So your job is to make sure that everybody is who they say they are. All right, we had a handheld mics here somewhere. Did you have the handheld mic? All right, so in this case, good. I always take selfies. Yeah. All right. So, okay, enough with the selfies. Daria, yeah. You have the first line. So, action.
Hi.
You have to talk to Christopher.
I'd like to use the application.
Sure. Just go authorize with the ID provider over there and then return here.
Hi.
So you have to go to Vic.
ID provider, the application asked me to identify myself.
Okay, what's your name?
Daria.
Cool, what's your password?
Tiger.
Very well. Can you confirm your phone, on your phone?
You can use your watch. You can use your watch.
Okay. Take out phone and click on it.
Great. Name. It's okay if the application gets your name and email address.
Okay.
Good. Take this code back to the application.
Here, this is the code. So you give this to Daria. And you'll need this next.
Hi, application. I'm back. ID provider gave me this code.
Hi, ID provider. Here's a code. Here's a code and my client secrets.
Looks good. Here's the ID token and the access token too for the session.
Let me see. I will just unpack the ID token. It looks like the user is named Daria. Hi, Daria. Welcome to the application.
A big round of applause to our great actors, Daria, Christopher, and Vic. Thank you very much for being such good sports. You can keep the hat. Real keepsake. All right, so you can take this back. All right, so what you just saw is what's called the Oauth 2 code flow, or in this situation, OpenID Connect. And the token that Vic gave to Christopher so that he could authenticate Daria looked like this, which we will see more of later. And then unpacking, it looks something like this, and we'll get into that in detail. All right, so now I will show you what this actually looks like in real life. So I have created an application. It doesn't matter, but this application is made in Java, and it runs on Azure. But you could make this application in any programming language, and you will not see any code today. You will just see HTTP requests. So you saw this one before, but I will do it slower this time. So let's say you make an application and you offer the user to log in with a few different providers. What is it actually that happens? If we start with login with Google, in this case, what happens when you click a login with Google link anywhere is that the server will generate a link, something like this. Normally, you will be redirected directly, so you'll never see something like this page, but this one lets you see what's actually going on. So Daria, in this case, was redirected because Christopher created this link. And it tells, please go to accounts.google.com, that would be Vic in our example. Tell accounts that the client ID, that would be Christopher in this example, wants to authenticate this user. And the third important part is redirect URL. So when the user is authenticated, come back to my application to continue the flow. So when I press this, I get the Google login window. You've probably seen this if you have more than one Google account. If you're not logged in, you will type your username, password, maybe use a two-factor key, so on. And then I come back here. This is when Daria returned from Vic to Christopher with the code. And you can see the code is up here in the URL. So this is actually just an HTTP redirect back from the identity provider to the application. The application will now pick out the code, which you see here. It will give its client ID again, its client secret, and it will call what's called a token endpoint. And this is when Christopher talked directly to Vic to get the further information about the user. So in this case, we execute this and we get back. So Christopher mentioned, or I guess it was Vic who said, you get the access token, you get the ID token, and here's a little bit more information. So this here, this is what we use to identify the user. This is the ID token. And this looks like a bunch of random line noise. Can anyone read what it says here? Let's look a little bit more at this string. So the string, it has a period here, and it has a period far over here. And here and over there, it starts with lowercase e, lowercase y, and j. Does anyone know what that means? Yes, very good. So the dot separates two JSON documents, and the EYJ is a open curly bracket, base64 encoded. So I can actually just take this token, and there is a very nice service for debugging these things called jot.io. So all the cool kids pronounce JWT, which is JSON Web Token. You can pronounce this jot. Then everybody knows that you're in the know. So if you haven't learned anything else today, you can learn to pronounce JWT jot, and then everybody thinks you know what you're talking about. All right. So I can paste this in here. This shows the token in three nice different colors. The red part is what's called the header. It's decoded here. The purple part is what's called the data. And the blue part is a signature. In this case, this document is signed by Google. So that means that, so in our example, Vic had signed the document that Christopher used. So Christopher can actually know it was from Vic and not something that was passed along some other channel. So this is a document that contains its own verification. When we decode it, we can see here some of the data here. So can anyone tell me what's the name of the user? Or rather, who is the user? 114.18.24. Oh, that's a very good answer. Any other answers? The user is Johannes Brodwall. Like I said, I will introduce myself many times through this talk. So my name is Johannes Brodwall, and this is the talk on OpenID Connect. How do you know that this user is Johannes Brodwall?
You would have to take this information and verify it with the OpenID provider.
All right, so in this case, Google says, this is Johannes. Can we trust that? Can we trust that this is Johannes?
If we trust Google, then yes.
Well, how did Google then get the information?
That's Google's problem.
All right, so do you trust Google to have the correct name of the user? What would prevent me from putting Barack Obama or Donald Duck as my username on Google? There's nothing. So this is actually not the name of the user. This is what the user asked Google to call them, which is a very different a piece of information than the name of the user. So who are we talking to? We don't know. What else can we say about this person that we're talking to? Do we know anything about who this could be? Yes. Are you sure that this is, so what does that mean, that this is the person's email?
That in Google case, especially,
Yes.
that means that it is that email.
So it does mean, in this case, we can be pretty sure that this user controls johannes@gmail.com. Yes, what else?
That's what the world is going to do, that they at least have access to that.
Yes, so they have access to that account in this case because that's the account that you used. Now let's try something else. So here, this is kind of interesting. The picture that I got up there is actually automatically retrieved from Google. If you want to play along, you can go to this URL and you can try and log in, and it will probably pull up your profile picture as well if it's shared. So this demo should work for your own information as well. So if I try this again, so here I have another account which is called johannes@brodwall.com. So let's continue a little bit more here. We'll see what goes on here. Okay. So what is the email address of this user? Johannes@brodwall.com. How do we know that, or rather, how does Google know that that's the email address of the user? In this case, it was, but it didn't have to be. So you can register any email address with Google. So how does Google know that that is the email address of the user? Yeah. Okay. So that means that this user at some point in time had access to this email address. But we don't know if that was a week ago, a year ago, 10 years ago. So it means that the level to which we can trust this email address is pretty low. What we can know, so somebody pointed out, this is the real identity of the user. Sub, it's a nice little feature of this tool. You can hold here, this is the subject, that means who the token refers to. The next time this user logs in, even if they've changed their name with Google, they will have the same sub number. So that means that what you can trust is that this is the same user who arrived with this subject ID the last time. At least as much as you can trust Google's login, passwords, and so on. So this means that you have something that is applicable for a personal account. But if you're in an organization context, that might not be what you want. So let's look at another identity provider. All right, I'm not gonna use this one because that was local. I'll do a bit back here. All right, so this one works, I think, no. This one works much better in anonymous mode. So when you're dealing with identity, you very often want to use incognito mode because you don't want the browser to remember the session because it kind of gets a little bit sticky. So here is Microsoft authentication. So in this case, I'm using, instead of using Google to authorize, I'm using Microsoft to authorize. And you can see the client ID if you paid attention, which I hope you didn't, because then you would be kind of a savant, is different. So when Christopher was talking to Vic, he had one client ID that he used to identify himself as an application. If Christopher was using another service to identify the user, he would have another, his client ID, his ID would be different with that service. And we'll look at that a little bit more later. So if you've ever come to this sort of login screen, so who has encountered this sort of login screen? I think most of you. So if you work in an organization that uses Microsoft Office, you use Outlook for email or something like this, you will use this to log on to your web email. You might use it to log on to a third-party service. So in this case, I have made an application in SupraSteria's Active Directory. I work for SupraSteria. And in this case, as I enter my email address with SupraSteria, I'm brought to SupraSteria's customized login page. So in this case, it's a little bit eager here. So in this case, I log in with my organization account in my personalized situation. And since this is an organization account, it means that my organization wants to make sure that it's actually me. So it doesn't let me in before let me see, error, checking for notifications. That's not a good, I think that the Wi-Fi just kicked out my phone. There we go, approve. So I will use mobile on this. Okay, so I don't have any special privileges in SupraSteria's Active Directory. But nevertheless, I can create an application that lives in that Active Directory. So, like I said before, a lot of you work for organizations that use Active Directory. How many of you knew that you could create an application in that Active Directory? So, not so many of you. So you can actually make this sort of application to authenticate your colleagues in your app. So if you make something like a time tracking software or internal a piece of software for your organization, it's very easy. You do it in the same way as authenticating with Google. So you saw the same request there. Now, because I don't have any special privileges in SupraSteria's active account, it means that any user that wants to authorize with this application have to give their consent. So just like Daria said to Vic, it's okay that Christopher gets to know her personal information. In this case, I have to approve or I have to accept that my app gets to know my personal information. And then I get a ID token, just like before. So let's take a look at this ID token, because it looks a little bit different. So we go back to jot.io, and we put it in here. All right. So who's my user now? Who can see? Who's the user? Yep. Come again? Yeah, this is true. What's the name of the user? So Soprasteria is a French company, so they like to call me Brodwall, Johannes. So that's the name in the French Active Directory. So how sure can I be that this user is named Johannes Brodwall? Why?
Because most companies don't let people choose their own names in their Active Directory.
Yeah, it kind of would be strange if you're paying out salary to someone and you haven't verified who that person is. But how can I be sure that it's Soprasteria's Active Directory that's authenticating this user?
Is it the OID?
No, I don't think it is. It is this here. So in this case, you have what's called an issuer. And the issuer is who created this information. This number here is called the tenant ID, and that is the number of Soprasteria as an organization. So that means that if I know which organization ID that my clients are using, then I can be pretty sure that this is Johannes Brodwall who works for Soprasteria. And that is in a business-to-business sort of scenario, that's a very strong thing to know. So again, I did not have to have any permissions to our Active Directory to create this application. You can go and do this now. So let's continue here. We create a session with this Active Directory. So now I have this user here. But it goes further than that. So you have, this is what's called a multi-tenant application, which means that not only can any user from Soprasteria Active Directory authenticate with it, any user from any Active Directory can authenticate with it. And just like with the previous demo, if you would like to, you could go to build-stuff-identity-demo.azurewebsites.net, and you can actually log on to this with your organization account. And you can see that a pretty simple application like this can retrieve your user information. In this case, I've also said, now maybe I've seen the user before. Maybe I have a cookie that tells me that this user was a user from a particular organization. So I have small kids at home, and so we're going to be using the 100-acre woods as our Active Directory. So when I log in, I get the 100-acre woods login experience. So in this case, who thinks that so I created the Active Directory for the 100-acre woods. Who think that I paid Microsoft to create it or to personalize it like this? I did not pay Microsoft to create this demo. So creating an Active Directory for a new organization and using it at the starter level is free and available, something you can try out. So you can do this by yourself, and it's good to play around with. So in this case, who lives in the 100-acre woods? Winnie the Pooh. Let's see. So Vinny lives in the 100-acre woods. And when Vinny signs in, just like before, he says that Johannes' Oauth demo would like to see your personal information, like to read your profile. So here we go. We get the code back. We take the code. We generate the token request, which is where we're going to get this ID token, the JOT. We can look at the JOT. And looking at this. So who's our user now? Winnie the Pooh, that's correct. And who told us that this was the user? The 100-acre wood, yep. And this is the tenant ID of the 100-acre wood. But here is something interesting. Does anyone notice anything different about Winnie the Pooh than about me? Yes, I mean, we all know he's a bear with a limited intelligence, so he gets a limited role, of course. So I hope you guys don't feel that I'm treating Winnie the Pooh poorly, but that's the role that he gets. So he has a role that's limited in this organization. Now, if you're paying attention, I told you this application was created in Suprastereo's Active Directory. Winnie the Pooh lives in an Active Directory that I created for this demo. How does this work? That Winnie the Pooh is a limited user in my application created in Suprastereo Active Directory. Does anyone want to know that? Well, who assigned it? The administrator of which Active Directory? Yes, exactly. So the 100-acre wood Active Directory, and this is very important. Come again? Exactly, not the owner of the application, but the user of the application. And this is one of the reasons why this is a powerful technology. So let me show you this. So in this case, I'm actually, in addition to being a user in Suprastereo Active Directory, I am an administrator in the 100-acre wood. And in the 100-acre wood, I can go in and I can look at my users, and I can look at what's called an enterprise application. So this is the enterprise application for my, so this is the 100-acre wood view of the application which live in Suprastereo Active Directory. So it's the client organization's view of this application. And in the client organization, we can then assign a user, just like you said. Now, often you would like those assignments to be connected to roles in that organization. So you would like to say, you know, somebody working for HR can be part of, can use the HR application with certain roles. You don't want to have to assign that individually. So for those of you familiar with Winnie the Pooh, you know that the whole 100-acre woods went on an expedition. This is typo in the original. And the expedition was, as you can see, terrific. Now, Winnie the Pooh has not been invited to the expedition yet. So, but as an administrator, I can say, I would like Winnie the Pooh to come into the, let's see, add member, and then we add Winnie. And I cannot, I think I need to reiterate this pretty many times because the application lives in Suprastereo Active Directory. This is an administrative task in the 100-acre wood Active Directory. As the application publisher, I have nothing to do with this. This is purely what the client organizations choose to do. So now, if I return to my demo application, and I log in again with the 100-acre wood, and let's see. So I don't know. I think it is Microsoft's fault that it's a bit slow now. I'm going to blame them anyway. So yes, it never crashes, but sometimes I think it might be because I'm using the trial version, so they're kind of limiting my use here. Okay, so I'm signing in with Winnie the Pooh, but oh my God, this is not like we saw earlier. What happens here? So it says, now, dear Winnie, you have to enter your phone number to register for a two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. So when I receive this code, we will get it here. So it's 440425. All right. Okay, so what actually happened now was that when I signed in with Winnie the Pooh the first time, I just had to type a username, And in this case, when I signed in again, after he had been assigned to the expedition, he had also to register his device for two-factor authentication. Let's take a little look at, so we get the code, we do a token request, we get back the ID token. I can create this, I can copy this ID token and we can take a look at it. So, does anyone notice anything different about Winnie the Pooh this time? New role, yes. Winnie the Pooh is now also terrific. He didn't lose his previous limited role, but it's terrific in addition because both of those rules apply. Can anyone notice anything else that's different? Yes, very good. MFA. This means that we now know that Winnie used a device like a phone to authenticate himself, which is extremely powerful. So, to know, right? So, who decided that Winnie should use two-factor or multi-factor authentication? Who decided? The application. So you think it was from Soprastero's point of view? No. Exactly. So this was determined by the Active Directory of the 100-acre woods. And just quickly to give you a view of how that works, we can go to the Active Directory, look at the enterprise application, look at the Java bin demo, and we can look here at the conditional access. So it says that if you're a member of the expedition, so here, everybody who logs on who's member of the expedition has to authenticate with, well, here you go, has to authenticate with a multi-factor. So again, the client organization determines this. So that's how that works. All right. Now, I know that this user in this case is Winnie. I know that he has the terrific role. I know that he authenticated with multi-factor. But of course, the limitation here is that you have to have some sort of Active Directory that has to be actively managed, which is good for some scenarios, but not for other scenarios. And I wasn't sure whether to show this one or not because it's kind of regional, but I will try it anyway. So most of you here are from Lithuania, yes? And if you are to access, let's say, your tax record or your health information from the government, you use mobile ID, right? Mm-hmm. In Norway, we have a similar system. Interestingly, in Norway, it's called bank ID because the banks are the ones that establish the trust. And then there's a government portal to integrate this with government services. So in this case, I'm using the ID portal. That means the identity gate, which is the Norwegian service. So just like before, instead of asking Google to authenticate me or asking Microsoft to authenticate me, I'm asking the government to authenticate me or authenticate my user. I have a different client ID and I have a different redirect URI when I go back. And in this case, I can enter my national identifier. So so this is not my national identifier. This is a test user. So otherwise, you'd think I was very young. So it says I was born in '94, which I'm not. Okay, so 24/07/94/2045, right? Hold on. I'll take an older user, which I do remember. So I'm not this old either. This is my one-time password. So that would go to my phone. And oh, what's happening here? I think I might be using the wrong version of the service. Come on. Hey, what happened?
It's a government service now.
Yeah. No, it's actually not their fault. I visited their offices and their. Oh, that's embarrassing. I'll try it again. No. All right. It is kind of fun, isn't it? I will. Okay, that's. I almost had it. Well, that's a different one. It is their fault. They must have changed it. Yeah. Or it might be a regional block. All right. So what would happen in this case is that I would, just like previously, I would get a ID token back, and I could use that ID token and I could decode the national identifier. I think there must be a regional block because all of the users that I've tried don't work.
What about demonstrating with them on mobile? Then you don't need
I can't do that on not on the test service. It doesn't integrate with it. So if I had used production, I could have done it, but not in test. So let's say that you have a national ID from your user. Now, can you trust that user? Well, the government. Well, well, can you trust that this is an honest user? No. So at least in Norway, it's very seldom that somebody is sentenced away from their right to do electronic banking. So even a criminal in jail will have access to the government portal for identifying themselves. So you don't know anything about the user's intent or what kind of person this is, but you do know that it is the person who has that national identifier. So you can show the health information of that person who has that national identifier. This becomes kind of interesting because what we're trying to build at my project now is a service that integrates several public and private services, and we're using the national identifiers of our users as sort of the master identifier, but then we have to be very sure to get those identifiers right, otherwise somebody can impersonate a police officer or a member of the military or a volunteer rescue or rescue volunteer or somebody who's in our system. So we need to, so knowing someone's national ID tells you something about their identity, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that you have to trust them, that you can't trust them. So what we saw here is that we had, in the case of Google, we have something that works for a personal account. Almost everybody has a Google account. You can use Facebook in the same way, but you really don't know who the user is. You just know that it's a returning user. You have to have some other way to establish the identity of the user. We saw we can use Active Directory. We can use it inside an organization. We can also use it across organizations. And the client organizations in what's called a multi-tenant application can themselves administrate who's got what access. We can use governmental services, and I would actually expect that the Baltic one, the mobile ID, has OpenID Connect integration. You can use the same code, just different configuration to integrate with government services. But then you cannot necessarily trust what is that user allowed to do except access the data of that person, like health records and tax records and this sort of stuff. I'd like to show one final example of an identity provider. We have on the build stuff community, we have a build stuff community Slack, right? Who's a member of the build stuff community Slack? So a Slack is pretty often can be a pretty curated source of information. If the build stuff community has like a organizer channel, I think that somebody would notice if somebody snuck into that channel who's not supposed to be there. So when you have an informal organization, so they don't have an Active Directory, but they might have a very active Slack, you can actually use that also as a source of identity. So let's look at that, because Slack is a little bit different than the other ones. When I ask Slack to identify me, I generate a authorization URL to Slack. I tell them who I am, and I tell them where the user should come after they have authenticated. And in this case, I'm asked if I give my consent. So I call this app, in the context of this, I call it Build Stuff Treasure Hunt. There is no treasure, but it would be fun if there was one. Okay, so with the Build Stuff Treasure Hunt application, you can authenticate with Slack. And in this case, I got the code back, just like with the other examples. And I can do a post to the token endpoint to get, well, not the ID token this time, just what's called an access token. So in the case of Slack, they don't give the identity in the same way as Google or Microsoft or the government portal. They give an access token. And the access token can be used to make API calls. So this is the basic integration between systems where you're giving consent to an application to act on your behalf. So now if I can complete here, you can see also on this one, it shows my pictures, it shows my email address. And this is the email address and the picture according to the Build Stuff community Slack. So I thought to give you a little bit of insight as to how that works. So in this case, I got this access token, and you can make an API call. And an easy way for Slack to make an API call is to just put the token in the URL like this. So I have slack.com/usersprofile.get and then the access token that I retrieved earlier. And here you can see my email address, my name, my last name, and you can see these are the images that I used to display the image. So if you authenticate with this application, with your own Slack account, you would presumably see your own image and your own name through this app. Oauth 2, which is the underlying technology here, is fairly flexible, so it can be used to make different kind of API calls. So in the case of Slack, I can ask for conversations.list. And here is a list of all the channels that I'm a member of. So you can see I am a member of the general channel, of the Build Stuff Conf channel, of the DevTools channel, and so on. And in the case of using this to decide what the users would do, I've actually used it to say, you know, if you have someone who's a member of the organizer channel, then you can treat them as an organizer, because the organizer channel is a private channel that only invited people get access to. All right, so we're about to wrap up here. So what you could see with this application is that the problem of identity is in many ways solved, but in some ways not, right? So you can create fairly easily and in a standard way an application that gets its identity from another service. You still have to think about what service are you getting the identity from? How much can you trust the user, and what can you trust the user to do based on your identity service? You can have different users authenticate in multiple ways or in the same way, and that is how a thing like Active Directory B2C or other services that do, like, you can log in with this service, you can log in with that service, and you have a consolidated view. Normally you would have these things behind there. And to recall how this worked in the first place, when Daria wanted to use Christopher's application, first she went to Christopher, And Christopher had a registration with Vic as a client of Vic as an identity provider. And Christopher redirected Daria to Vic with with his client ID and with the destination that Daria should return. Then Vic does all kinds of checking username, password, maybe a two-factor based on the policies that have been set up. And he sends Daria back with a code. And Daria, and this is an HTTP redirect back to the original application with the code as part of the URL. And then Christopher's application would pick up the code from the URL and send it to Vic along with a little bit more information. And he would get the identity token back that he could then use to look up who is the user, and then he could greet Daria with a friendly hello, Daria. And this is the same technology with all these different identity providers. And indeed, in this application, it is one application that's configured with different ways. It's the same code that handles all of them except for Slack, because Slack is different. If you're interested in learning more, you can find my code at GitHub. And in the GitHub repository, you will also find this called exercise.md. And this lets you play out how to log in with all the different identity providers using nothing except your web browser and curl. So you need your web browser to craft the URLs to redirect back and forth, and then you can generate the post request with curl. So this guides us through the process of registering with the different providers and how to create the URLs and the post request to get the token. I would also appreciate questions and follow-ups on Twitter. And I don't think we have time for many questions, but I will hang around here after the talk. And then if anyone wants to discuss this further, I will be hanging out with my friends that I have nothing to do with in the Microsoft booth. If you would like a sticker of your own with the sort of Azure thing, you can come up and get a sticker here, courtesy of Microsoft. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions. So barring that, thank you very much for your attention. I'm Johannes Brodwall, if that wasn't clear already. And I hope that you will be able to create applications without ever having to touch a password in the future. Thank you. Yes, a question.
It's more about authorization than authentication, though. But for the Microsoft application, you got a list of roles. How would that work very differently with claims?
The roles become claims. So when I publish an application, I didn't show that part of it, but in Soprasteris Active Directory, when I registered and published the application, I listed up which roles exist and the description of those roles, and then the role, if we log in with Winnie the Pooh again, let's try that here. So the roles, I can log in with a rabbit because I think it's already logged in. Yep. So and the roles then become claims. Oops. It's a bit long now. So here. The rabbit is terrific. This is a claim.
Yeah, okay, so you just use the claims.
Yeah.
Roles array as claims.
Yeah. So in the JOT, the roles becomes a array of strings that as a claim. Yep.
Do you have to register the client ID with Soprasteria ID?
No. If I understand your question correctly, when I created the application, I went into Soprasteria Active Directory, and I showed you where to look at the application when you're the using organization. When you're creating the organization, you can create a create an application that's being published from this Active Directory. And in this, so I've created one here. And in this, you get the application ID here. So this is generated for you, and you copy and paste it into your application configuration.
So I can't create an application which I can use, and I use the Soprasteria AD to authenticate you.
And well, you can create an application that I can go to, and I can choose to authenticate with Soprasteria account. And I would then have to give my consent for you to get the information. So I would have to say, okay, so it's okay that Jens gets my information, and then you would see that I'm Johannes and I work for Soprasteria.
But he wouldn't have the client ID.
He would not have a client ID for anything in Soprasteria. He would only see this from his application's point of view.
And if this is not okay for Soprasteria to use random services, they can block it.
They can block it individually or as a policy. And I hope that most organizations only block these things individually because it's very helpful to roll on things. I would encourage you to try out this if you have an Active Directory, to try out, to go to buildstuff-identity-demo.azurewebsites.net and try and log in with your own Active Directory and see what shows up so see how your organization reacts to that. It is an important use case for Active Directory to allow this. So what I mean is how it will prompt you and what information the application will get about you.
It will end my contract.
No, it is a perfectly legitimate use of Active Directory.
But you don't only have to configure it to be able to log on with Microsoft. You don't have to say that the Soprasteria is allowed.
That's correct. So with this link here, it allows me to log in with any organization. I have here a link that contains what's called a login or a domain hint that says, I think this user is from Soprasteria. So if I made like soprasteria.myapp.com, I could do that assumption, and then the user would, so I think I have to do this in incognito if it's going to work. So the user will then be prompted with something like this. And now if I were to say, you know, it's actually wrong. This is actually Vinny at 100acrewood.onmicrosoft.com. And then, well, it didn't show what I wanted to do. Yeah. So when exactly. So when I change this, it does exchange the page, but that is a little bit. I'll see if I can do it in a other demo here because I don't have this. So here I'm assuming no, I went directly in. Let's see here. Okay. No. So I'm already logged in with all of the organizations, so it's a little bit difficult to illustrate. But you can assume which organization your user will be coming from and then directly show that prompt. And what happened, what you saw here was that because I already was logged into those organizations, I was never shown the prompt at all. I was just authenticated directly because I had already given my consent. So, like I said, it can be a little bit tricky to demonstrate when you're not using incognito mode because all of a sudden you're logged in and the login flow goes so fast you cannot interrupt it. So, very good questions. All right, I hope that you all learned something useful, something that you didn't know beforehand, and something that will enable you to do things that you didn't think was possible, and hopefully also that you feel you understand the guts of OpenID Connect now. Thank you again.